I should know this stuff. Hello lovelies, and welcome to the April 2023 episode of the Not Quite Enough Yarn podcast. My name's Leslie. This is a podcast about knitting, crochet, machine knitting this month. Sadly no spinning, although I'm hoping to rectify that, and all sorts of yarny goodness recorded on the south coast of England. Thank you for being here. Whether you're new or returning, it's lovely to have you here. Hope everyone's well. Thanks for all the comments and thoughts on previous podcasts and also on the weekly vlog. If you've come across that, that goes up every Friday. That's more life than knitting. Not that my life is that exciting, but people seem to like chatting with me, which is great. If you'd like to get hold of me on the social media stuff, I'm either known as knittingordeath, or my email address is notquiteenoughyarn@gmail.com. Yeah, I think that's it. We have a make-along running at the moment. This is the Craft for Someone Else, Mel. So the idea is if you're making something, and it can be a gift for a family member or a friend, it can be charity making. If you're making it for someone other than yourself, it's eligible. The entry is on Ravelry. There's a group called the Not Quite Enough Yarn podcast group, and there's a thread on that. In fact, there are two threads. There's a finished object thread. That's a no chatter thread, so please just post your finished object pictures on there. But please also, if you'd like to, post them on the chatter thread so that people can comment and ooh and ah and tell you how fabulous you are. It's always nice to have the ego massaged, isn't it? If you're unable to use Ravelry, please email your entry to, as I said, notquiteenoughyarn@gmail.com, and I'll add it to the Ravelry thread for you. There's a draw every quarter, so the next one will be next month, the month after. End of June, sorry. Vague. Yes, so at the end of June and at the end of September, we'll have a quarterly draw. The finished object thread, the prize will be a physical prize, so probably a skein of yarn, possibly a project bag, something like that. And there'll also be a pattern prize drawn from the chatter thread, which is a pattern up to, can't remember how much I said, $12, $15 US, something in that ballpark is fine. And all prizes will be announced on the podcast, so that's how you'll find out if you're a winner or not. I think that's it. Whips are allowed. No, that's fine. I know some people like to put on other things that they're working on, so maybe things that they've made that aren't yarn related. I won't take them off the threads, but if they are drawn when I do the random post generator thing, then I'll draw again if it's not a yarn related item. But all yarny crafts are welcome, so again, crochet, knitting, weaving, spinning, if you're making someone a skein of wool, a skein of yarn, then all things yarny are eligible. If none of that makes sense, because I don't feel I'm at my most coherent at the moment, the details will be in the notes below. So you can find all the information there, and also at the top of the Ravelry threads. So good luck. There's some lovely entries already. If you get a moment, by all means go and have a look, because there are some really nice projects in there. So that is all the mal. I'm currently knitting on a penguono, which would not be eligible for the mal. Plus, don't enter my own mals, that would be a bit strange. This is the penguono by Stephen West. I'll talk about it later, because I had to do some recalculations and some folks have been interested in that, so I'll talk about that. But this is for me, so definitely not a crafting for someone else, Mel. My next item, however, was made for someone else, so I'll scoot you on to the next section. Hello lovelies. Apologies before I start this section of any noise. There's building work going on the house, so there may be some knocking and banging, so apologies. Also, sometimes that sets the dog off as she tries to defend us from those nasty builders. You know what it's like. So apologies for any noise. If it gets too much, I will stop and edit. So also apologies if this is a little bit stop-start. There we go. For that reason, so I'm trying to kind of keep things as smooth as I can. Yes. If you're listening to this on headphones, I'm really sorry. But I have a deadline to get something in the post, so I do need to record this today. A couple of months ago decided to start putting all of my ends, after I've woven in ends, into clear, like Christmas baubles, and I would put a year's worth probably on here somewhere. And last month, because I didn't have any finished objects, I had an empty bauble. Well, look at the ends in that baby. Ha ha ha. Stuffed full of them it is. Because I have made a gift for a friend of mine. It's her birthday. By the time you see this, it will have been her birthday, which is why I'm working today to get this recorded and I can get the item in the post. I have made her a panel jacket. This is the third panel jacket I've made. I was wearing my grey panel jacket, which I'll put a picture in here, when I saw her, and she said, "Oh, I like that." And I said, "Would you like me to make you one?" Now, she's a crafter herself, so she was a little taken aback, because normally she's asked to make things rather than if she would like one. But she tried mine on, so I made a few notes as to what alterations I would need to make, because she wanted to do it narrower than mine. She didn't need it as wide. She wanted it longer than mine, and she wanted pockets. So we have this. Pockets. I'll put a picture in here so that you can see it in full. This is based on the panel jacket by Carol Lapin. I'm never sure if it's Lapin or Lapin, like the French for rabbit. Je ne sais pas. But whatever it is, Carol, you know Carol. It's a pattern that's now in the Internet Archive. I will link it below. But you can see from the picture that I'm putting in here that this is a very specific shape, and the panels in that are made different lengths to give a shaped hem. I didn't do any of that. It's also made using, I think, a worsted weight yarn. It's knitted on quite a heavyweight yarn on a 5.5mm needle or something like that, I think. Whereas what I've made here is 4-ply or fingering weight. So, although it is a panel jacket, because it's a jacket made up of panels, that pattern is the inspiration rather than the pattern. But it gives an idea of where the thought came from. So what have I used to make this? Well, firstly, my knitting machine. So I made all of the panels on my flatbed knitting machine, which is a Brother 836, but I'm sure the number really doesn't matter. So yes, made the panels individually on the knitting machine. They're something like 270 rows long, because she wanted a longer jacket. Also, I found out from the last panel jacket I made, the sort of tealy coloured one, that it can end up cropped unless you go long, because when you make a panel on the machine, it kind of, you have weights on it to pull it down, so you don't get an entirely accurate view of how long it's going to be, because it will spring up a little when it's off the machine. So I went long on this one. So all of the panels were made on that. So I've got a wider panel for the centre back. I've got 4 identical panels, 8 identical panels, 2 on each side, front and back. and then the sleeves. And then what I did, how you join these is entirely up to you. You could pick up stitches, do a 3 needle bind off, you could sew them together. I did a crochet seam, which I'll attempt to show you. And for the seaming, I use a different yarn. So the main yarn is King Cole Anti-Tickle Merino Blend 4-ply. It's a natty little title, isn't it? That's in the slate blue colourway. That comes on cones. You can buy balls of it of 100 grams, but it comes on 500 gram cones, which is what I had here. And the contrast is, forgive my German, Skoppelwolle Zauberball Crazy in the U-boot colourway. Where I've done these before, my contrast has been a speckled or a variegated yarn. This has longer colour changes, excuse me, as you can see in the pockets, because I made the pocket pieces on the machines as well. So you can see you've got much longer colour changes on those. So it gives it a slightly different effect. It means the cuff pieces, that'll be a text, the cuff pieces are 2 different colours, because you're just at a different point in the ball. But I rather like it. I think it gives it a different look. And the fact that the pockets were made of the contrast yarn and the end of the neckband pulls it all together, because you've got all of the colours on the ball in those pieces. So it's not as if you've got green, blue, and then suddenly a different colour altogether here. It does all, hopefully, I think, tie in. So made the panels, crocheted them together. Then I have a flippy uppy hem. Sorry, Lynn, the person who is going to. It is a flippy uppy hem. I should have gone down a needle size, I think. If it's too annoying, Lynn, let me have it back and I will correct that. So the hem is flipping up a little bit, so I just picked up at the bottom, did a few rows of garter stitch, did the same at the top of the pockets, and then once the piece was all joined together, picked up a long neckband, so all the way round, did a bit of a gauge look at to work out how many stitches per number of rows I needed to pick up, because I've always found that, unless I actually do the maths, that can be a bit tricky. If you're working in straight garter stitch, you can work on a safe assumption that it's 2 rows per stitch. That's fairly safe. On garter stitch, it can be different depending on your row gauge. So I measured here how many stitches per inch, and then made sure that was, am I doing that the right way? No, sorry, measured here how many rows per inch, checked on some of my bands how many stitches per inch, so that when I picked up the stitches around, my gauge would match, so I didn't have any puckering or too much, you know, puckering or gathering here. It's laying fairly flat, which is good. I also added some short rows to the neckband to give it a slightly shawl collar effect. So I had markers about here somewhere and just did some short rows just to give it that slightly bigger collar around the neck, because I like that, and so Lynn is going to like that too, I hope. It's a fun make. I mean, obviously the machine pieces are really quick. It then gets a bit faffy. They do need blocking before you do anything with them, because being just strips of, long narrow strips of stocking stitch, they just curl and roll and goodness knows what else. So they need blocking, and obviously the neckband is quite a lot of stitches, so that takes quite a while. But it is a fun make, and I hope it will be a fun wear for her as well. So again, this is based on the panel jacket by Carol Lapin. but very much my version of it, because I didn't do that staggered hem. All my panels are the same length. I do slightly increase them to give a slight flare to the bottom of the jacket, but apart from that, pretty straight. Shaped sleeves so that they're not too flappy. Again, I'm kind of making this as if I was wearing it, and I'm hoping that Lynn will like the same sort of elements, because she might have wanted fuller sleeves. I didn't ask, sorry. But as she tried on mine and we talked through the modifications you would make to mine to suit her, fingers crossed that we got it right. So, happy birthday, Lynn. Hope you get this before the birth date. I'll get this in the post very shortly, and I'm very happy with it. So total yarn used, 1,954 meters. Like I say, it's 4-ply thickness, so fingering weight, and flappy hem aside. Yes, I should have gone down a needle size, but I didn't. I'm rather pleased with it, so I hope that my friend will be happy too. Cheers. Hello lovelies, how are we? I am wearing my heavily modified Magpie Tendency, which normally doesn't have this chevron pattern. That was basically the modification. Also, I made it in sport weight yarns rather than 4-ply weight. And I look as if I'm just absorbed into this chevron. But anyway, let's move onwards. I'm in my knitting corner, and this is a good place to talk to you about this poncho. Now, this is something I made a few years ago, but I was wearing it last month, and I said, oh, this is my poncho, I just did this, just did that, blah, blah, blah. And a viewer, Christine, thank you very much, Christine. Is it Christine or Christina? Apologies. I think you may be a Christina. I'm sorry if I'm getting it wrong. Wanted to know more, and I realised it's very easy to be dismissive of what we do. So to me, this was a just do this, just do that. And you may hear me talk about it and think, well, yeah, it is. But someone else's just do this, just do that is my, could you explain that again, please? With illustrations, and show me, and about 3 times before I get it. So, you know, we all have things that come automatically to us, and other things take a while. And also, as well as throwing the remote control for the TV on the floor, I didn't really say anything about it, so I'm going to. So, as you can see, it's made of Noro, and I've written notes about this and everything, Noro Silk Garden Sock. I had 5 balls of this colourway, which was 87S, and so I decided to make myself a poncho. And what I did is I made 4 squares, and each square took 1 ball of yarn, so that was easy. And let me just see how big these squares came out to. Yeah, I'm not quite as organised as I'd like to be. Talk amongst yourselves. While you're waiting, here's some music. That is about 18 inches square. But like I say, it was 1 ball's worth, and you may be looking for something smaller, something bigger, who knows. For the squares, I did 4 squares but 3 different patterns, because I'm like that. You could just do a regular granny square. You could do it in rows, just work to the width you want and work up till it's a square. It really is up to you how you want to do that. I used probably the 200 crochet blocks pattern, not pattern, book, because I know that's one I have. But so the first square that I will show you has a sort of cross in the middle, and I made 2 following that pattern. One was a mitre square, and with mitre squares and crochet, they tend not to be exactly square, so it wouldn't necessarily work if you wanted to put lots this size together for a blanket. You can see it's sort of stretching out slightly at the point, but for a poncho it works fine. And then the other design I did has the cross going sort of corner to corner. The cross being just where you work a chain instead of a stitch. So I made those 4 squares, then I sewed them together, and you sew them with a bit of a gap in the middle for your head. And the easiest way to show you is if you fold 2 of the squares in half, you can see the overall shape. So you're joining a single edge together in such a way that these folded in half, these 2 will also match. I'm not explaining this well, but I'm hoping that what I'm showing you is a lot clearer than my words. See what I was saying about explanations? So 4 squares, 1 ball each, 4 balls of yarn. I told you I had 5. I used 40 grams of the 5th, so another 120 meters. The Silk Garden sock is 300 meters a ball, so that's how much each was for the squares. And then 120 meters in total. After I'd sewn the squares together, but of course you could crochet them together, you can join them in any way you like, I just joined the yarn and just did, looks like 3 rows around the inside. And when I got to that part of a V, I did some decreases, so worked 3 stitches into one to bring that point in so that the neck wasn't, the edging wasn't baggy. I then also did one of my standard crochet edgings, which was a shell stitch. And so that slip stitch, miss 2, 5 trebles, that's UK terminology, so doubles in US terminology, into the next stitch, miss 2, slip stitch, repeat all the way around. And it creates just a nice edge. So Christine, I'm so sorry, and this lady sent me poetry and things and everything. She sent me a poem she thought I would like for my work and that, so thank you very much for that. I hope that helps. I'm sorry that it's not a pattern that I can refer you to, but I hope that explains how I made it. So basically 4 granny squares sized to suit. These were 18 inches across. Sew them together, leaving a hole for the head. Oh no, that's my sweater. And like I say, it's best if you think of it as a diamond shape. Although of course you can wear it that way, long over the arms. And then just a bit of edging to pull it together around the neck, and an edging just to finish it all off on the sides. I hope that helps. And thank you for your interest. And I'm sorry if I was dismissive when I talked about it before. It's the item that I tend to keep next to this chair, so if I'm just feeling a bit chilly, rather than going in search of a sweater, I normally just pull that on. I have a small FO to show you, which is sewn rather than knitted. Viewers who have been here a while will remember my cable holder that I made out of old cotton reels. And that has beautifully just demonstrated the problem that I have with it. So this design is fine. I think it works best if you have longer cables because they stay on pretty well. And also it will work well for fixed circulars where you've got a bit of weight each end to give a good balance. But these are all my this was for my interchangeable cables, and they fall out. They're very light. There's only a small area in which they're joined and they fall out. So I have made a sewn cable holder. This is not a competition in even lines or straight seams, because I would not win. So the stitching quality is not high. As long as it works, I'm not going to worry too much. I know some of these seams are very wonky. That's fine. So this is how it will hang. And I took a strip of fabric. This was fabric left over from a dress that I made a couple of years ago. Hemmed the edges, folded it in half, sewed it along the top, added this ribbon, and then just sewed seams across. I don't know why I think demonstrating across the back is really going to help. Let's do it where the camera can see it, Les. So sewed a number of seams across to fit in the cables. And as this is very much a utility piece, I'm just going to write the length of the cables on with a pen, regular pen. I have some fabric pens, and I was trying it out because I was going to be a bit artier. And I was going to sew the cable down here and then write the cable lengths on the ribbon. But I tried the fabric pens that I have on the ribbon and they didn't show up terribly well. And I found the best thing that showed up, because this is a textured ribbon, things fall, writing on with any kind of pen didn't work terribly well, and I did a few sort of experiments and I found that writing with a regular black biro on this grey did the trick fine. So that's what I'm going to write on here, so that when I go to my cables I can see what length they are. And that is that. So we'll see how it holds up. As you can see, I have a couple of straight needles in the top just to keep it straight. One's on the floor at the moment, that's fine. If I find these do slip out, then I'll just put some stitches in at the side by hand, just to hold them in place a little better. But it's kind of experimentation. I had a look on Pinterest for different ideas. This was my sort of amalgam of the ideas I saw. And let's see how it works. Hopefully I'll have fewer cables on the floor than I have at the moment. But like I say, that with the cotton reels will work fine, or will certainly work better for my fixed circulars, so they may have a home in that. There we go. Hello lovelies. Not sure if I mentioned this on the month-end podcast before, but I definitely mentioned it on the vlog, that I am starting a Penguono by Stephen West. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the Penguono, but in case you're not, as I said to my knitting group, I won't be styling it like this, but I could if I wanted. But it's a jacket, quite a loose fitting jacket. There's the kind of classic picture that's normally on the Ravelry page, that kind of thing. And it is the perfect pattern for me because it's a use up different colours of yarn sort of pattern. So there we go. Before I forget, I'm wearing my Liz Vierke by Bergen Designs. I'll put the details in the notes below, but I digress. So Penguono knitted jacket. It's quite an old Stephen West pattern, and at earlier points in his career, when he was grading for size, he would do that by gauge. So a bigger pattern, a bigger garment, bigger gauge. And this meant going into heavier weights of yarn, bigger needles. So there's a logic to it, but it does mean that you're not necessarily getting the fabric that you want. Because if you look at the design and the picture is something shown in 4-ply or a sport or a double knitting weight, and you think, I really like that, and then you go to make it in a larger size and you're dealing in a chunky or super bulky weight, you're going to have a very different garment. So I wanted to make a Penguono to fit my size, but in a yarn that isn't super bulky, basically. And so I mentioned on the podcast that, on the vlog, that that's what I'm going to do, and I'm reworking the stitch count basically and the row count. I've kind of reverse engineering the pattern to make it work at a different gauge. And a few people have expressed an interest in that. So I thought what I would do is just show you my my thought process. Now I'm not going to do that on the Penguino because it's not my pattern. Reverse engineering, some people do use it to kind of rip off patterns that they haven't bought, or some even use it to rip off patterns and then sell them. That's not what I'm here for. I am purely here to show you how to rework designs in a different gauge. So I'm assuming that this is a pattern to which you have all due rights. So if you have the Penguino pattern, you'll be able to follow this method to do it yourself. It's very easy. So in order to show you how to do this, I thought I would use a pattern that I know I have rights to because it was my design. And it was sold to a magazine, but after a period of time, the rights revert to me, so I can talk about it quite freely without upsetting anyone, hopefully. It's also a pattern no one's made, so, you know, no one's going to worry. It's a crochet pattern, but the principle's the same, whatever craft you're using. Now, some of you will be thinking, yeah, we know this stuff. That's fine, that's great. If you're not interested, I completely understand. See you in a few minutes, hopefully. But for those who were interested in kind of the methodology, here's how I do it. Well, I'm going to show you two different ways. There are no doubt many different ways, and as with all craft-related things, it often comes down to finding the one that suits you best. So this is the Bud Sweater, which was published in Inside Crochet in February 2011, which means I probably never got paid for the design, but that's another story. I've told that story before. Moving on. Very simply shaped item, straight body, square neckline, tapered 3/4 length sleeve, so very simple. I haven't recalculated everything. I've just taken one measurement and shown you a couple of different ways of doing it. So the original gauge, this is all about gauge, I'm afraid. It's gauge and it's maths. You shouldn't be frightened of either of these things. There we go. So the original gauge was 18 stitches and 13 rows to give you 4 inches each way. So that gives you 4.5 stitches per inch and 3.25 rows per inch. Sounds like not many rows per inch. Remember, this was crochet. No. Now if I take the smallest size, what I would need to do first of all is go to the pattern and work out from the pattern how big the item is. It will tell you some of the measurements, you know, it tells you you're making a, 34-inch chest, 36-inch chest, what have you. But you need to kind of work the maths backwards to get the same thing. So the smallest size, it was made in pieces, and the back is 73 stitches. So 73 stitches at 4.5 stitches to the inch comes out at 16.22 inches, which you may want to round up to 16.25. That's absolutely fine. And you want to do that for all of the measurements to work out how many stitches you'll need in your new gauge. That's assuming your pattern doesn't have a schematic. This one does. I would call it a partial schematic because it covers the main measurements, the circumference, sleeve length, total body length. It doesn't cover things like the depth of the neck, the width of the neck, those sorts of things which you would need to know to rework the pattern. But you've got some of them there already, so some of the work is done for you. So our smallest size is 16.22 inches across. So if your gauge is now 22 stitches per 4 inches, so you're working it in a 4-ply or fingering weight yarn, the original was a double knitting, you've now got 5.5 stitches per inch. You had 4.5 before. 16.22 times 5.5 gives you 89.21 stitches. Now if you can work 0.21 of a stitch, I salute you. but don't worry about teaching me. I don't want to work 0.21 of a stitch, trust me. These measurements rarely work out exactly, but you can normally get pretty close. So if this was a completely unpatterned design, you could just say, right, I want 89 stitches. If you feel you need an even number because of things that happen later, you could say, right, I want 88 or 90, depending on if you wanted to go up or down. This pattern has a bud design along the edges, and that has a stitch repeat. So when you're working out your number of stitches, you need to know how many repeats or partial repeats you want. Ideally you'd do total repeats because it just makes life easier when you're making it. And this particular one had an 8 stitch repeat plus 1. And it happens to work out perfectly because 89 stitches is 11 times 8 plus 1. That's easy. So what you would essentially do is that for every measurement. You'd work out your stitches or your rows per inch and work out your sizes for each part of the item, and then rework the stitch and row count into your new gauge. There is another way of doing that. It may even be a simpler way of doing that. You can tell because I came to this second. I always go for the more complicated first. We knew that our original gauge was 18 stitches for 4 inches. Our new gauge is 22 stitches for 4 inches, which is 1.22 times bigger than the 18 stitches. You following? Marvellous. So this means that you can just multiply everything up by 1.22. So if you take your original number of stitches, 73, times it by 1.22, you come to 89.06, which is not exactly the 89.21 that we had before, but goodness me, it's close enough. And given that you're going to round it because you have the pattern repeat, you're still getting to 89. So that works. You can also do this with the rows, and actually that can be an easier way of doing things like sleeve calculations. So if you've got a tapered sleeve, and on this pattern your original gauge was 13 stitches to 4 inches, and say your new gauge, because you do have to do a swatch, so your new tension is 20 stitches per 4 inches. You've now got a new gauge that's 1.54 times the old gauge. So if you were increasing, increasing, it was in bits. If you were increasing every 3 rows at the old gauge, 3 times 1.54 is 4.6 rows. So you know that you need to increase an average of every 4.6 rows to match, so that you've got your increases going at the same intervals, essentially. Now again, I can't do 0.6 of a row. Maybe you can. Well done. So there is a bit of fudging involved, and it might be that you have to do 4 some of the time, 5 some of the time. You know, there's a little bit of reworking involved because these numbers are extremely unlikely to work out bang on and exactly, but it gives you a good indication of where you need to be with it. I don't know if that's been any help at all, or if I've made things more confusing. If I have, then I apologise. But yes, reverse engineering, which is what I'm doing with the Penguono, to make it the same size but at a finer gauge. So that's the plan. This is my Penguono box, so you can see all the colours I've got going in here. I'm using the grey as a basis, so that there's a cone of grey here, and that I'm using either with another colour if the other colour is double knitting weight, or 2 strands of the grey if the other colour is finer. And that's going to be the basis of my Penguono. So you'll see it come along. I won't necessarily have the same kind of stripe sequence as the original pattern because I am using up bits and pieces, as you can see. But I'm looking forward to making it. Hello lovelies, going to finish things up with a roundup, not really a roundup of whips because I'm only going to talk about two because they're the ones I've been doing most work on. I'll start off with, well, I'm going to carry on the red theme, red shirt, red chair, red sweater. So this is the sweater that I had started another pattern and didn't like the way it was going, so I unpicked that. And now I'm working on Floof by Skein Deer. And this is a pattern that was originally written to be 4-ply weight and mohair held together, which is why it was floofy. I'm not doing that. I'm just using either DK weight yarn, or I think I've got some sport in here as well. And I'm putting together a lot of the red yarns that I've got in those weights. So we've got here some alpaca, we've got some Manos del Uruguay, yeah, we've got all sorts of stuff in here. So this is as far as I've got. So you can see I've split for the sleeves and also done a little bit of work on the sleeves. The bottom half of the sweater is going to be a sort of darker burgundy red, and the bottom half of the sleeves will be the same. But I wanted to use up the yarns. I didn't want the sleeves to be all burgundy. I wanted to have some of the same colours that I've got in the top half of this. On the main body I've been doing a sort of almost like a fade technique to kind of move from one colour to the next, although it's not a very subtle fade because the colours are quite different. On the sleeves I just did regular stripes. So that's where we are. It's coming along fairly well. Yeah, not much to say, just the body to work down, finish the sleeves, neckband, and that will be done. I'm enjoying working on it. It's moving along at a reasonable pace, and it's a simple knit. It's good kind of TV watching. I don't normally do the telly I've been watching, but I watched on recommendation Magpie Murders, which has just appeared on terrestrial TV. I think it was on one of the streaming networks previously. And I really enjoyed it. It's a whodunit, it's a murder mystery, but what I enjoyed about it was a really unusual female lead character, because this was an older woman with flaws, with idiosyncrasies, and just seemed a very human, approachable character, very well rounded. A lot of times when you have a female lead, they're very feisty and funny and wisecracking, and those characters are great fun, but this character just seemed really relatable. She's intelligent, she's emotional, she's just a really strong character. So Magpie Murders, my mate Mand has read the book and said it was a very enjoyable book. I haven't read it. It's by Anthony Horowitz, and he also wrote the screenplay for the TV show. So very enjoyable. So this was good TV knitting. I'm going to run out of battery and my other one's upstairs. That's annoying. So I decided to come upstairs rather than upstairs for the battery and back down again. And it being quite chilly, I put a sweater on. This is the Whatever by Julie Knits in Paris. I modified the neckline to give it a bit of a collar and used lots of scraps to make it. So, and actually it kind of ties in. I had the red shirt, which, you know, I've still got on. Had the red shirt for the red sweater and the multicoloured sweater to show you what will become a very multicoloured sweater. So I've spoken about this earlier. This is the Penguono. Almost forgot the name for a moment. And this is as far as I've got. Oh, we are just slick. So you start off with a straight piece for the back, and this is where I am so far. So I'm going to put a stitch marker on there. It is not without flaws. I was just talking about that character being flawed and it being a part of being human. I'm very human. Yeah, if mistakes are a sign of humanity, I am extremely human. So there is a bit of a flaw in here, which you may or may spot. I'm not going to point it out. If you spot it, well done. If you don't, it's not a problem. This is gathered a little at the moment because it's on a chain for a provisional cast on. Obviously, once that chain is undone, then this will hang straighter. But here we go. I'm enjoying this so far. It's on large needles. I think I'm on 6mm or 6.5. They're Knit Pros, so the printing has worn out a long time ago. So it is growing fairly quickly, and we all know I am not a process knitter. I enjoy the process of knitting, but I am not someone who would sit and make a blanket for a king-size bed in 4-ply yarn. You know, that's just not the type of knitting that that I enjoy. So this will, I think, will work for me because it has lots of change, and in fact the way I'm doing it already, we've got a slight shift in colour. It's very subtle, but I've gone from a 4-ply yarn to a double knitting yarn. So I've gone from 2 strands of this grey to a single strand. So it's not showing up brilliantly on camera, it's better at a distance, but there is a line there where we're seeing slight changes in colour. So my hope is to have enough blue with another ball that I've got. Oh, actually, I've just realised this is a magic ball. Well, that'll make it interesting. Yes, I'm hoping to make the back piece all blue, various shades thereof, and then we'll see where we go from there. But it will be multicoloured and hopefully fun to knit. So I should put that back in its box. And that's it for this month. So thank you so much for being here. I hope the maths hasn't just, you know, I hope you're still here after the maths, I think is what I'm saying. So that was April, and we look forward to May. May is a month with 3 bank holidays unusually. We normally have 2 in May. The first Monday of the month is normally a day off for May Day, and the last Monday of the month is a day off for the spring bank holiday. But we have an extra one this year for the coronation. Don't think there's much planned, no kind of big activities. The Zoom call, the one hosted by Barbara of the Flame and Fibre podcast, and the tech side is hosted by Valerie of A Visit with Nana and Papa. That is set for 27th of May, so the last weekend of the month. Hop on over to Barbara's podcast. I'm sure you're watching it already, but if you're not, she does a daily vlog. And also her group on Ravelry, there's a sticked, is that a verb? Sticked? Stuck? There's a post at the top of the thread, or thread at the top of the group. And the details for logging in and the timing and so forth are all on there. They are lovely chats. We just knit, well, you know, whatever craft people are doing, and just chat, and they are good fun. So that will be at the end of the month. And that, I think, is all I have for April. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all your comments and thoughts. I always love to hear from you. It's great to hear what you're up to, you know, how your crafting is going. I hope you're well. I hope life is treating you kindly, and I hope you get time to do the things that bring you joy. So until next week, if you watch the vlog, or next month, if you watch the podcast, take very good care. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.